So I got a hot topic for current events for you, Adrian. It's one that I think is going to ruffle some feathers, you know. Welcome to Disruptarian Radio, by the way, folks. I'm Dickie Thompson here with my buddy Adrian Mulligan, and today we're diving into something pretty controversial.
Yeah, and I've been reading a lot about this recently, Dickie. It's actually something I'm really concerned about. The whole question of whether Social Security is basically just a giant Ponzi scheme, or if it's actually, functioning as the insurance policy it was originally designed to be. It's honestly keeping me up at night, right?
I know, right? It's like one of those things everyone kind of takes for granted, but doesn't actually examine too closely. And with Elon Musk recently calling it a Ponzi scheme, I thought, well, this is the perfect time to, really get into it on Disruptarian Radio.
Absolutely. And I think what makes this conversation so important is that it affects literally everyone. Like, we're all paying into this system and hoping it'll be there when we need it, right? But the numbers don't look good, Dickie.
So what do you say we break this down for our listeners? I mean, there's got to be a reason why people are comparing it to a Ponzi scheme in the first place, right? So speaking of Elon Musk, I think we should probably start with, what he actually said, because it caused quite a stir. Like, calling Social Security a Ponzi scheme that's a pretty bold statement, right?
Yeah, it really is. And the thing that's fascinating is that this isn't just Elon being provocative for the sake of it. There's actually, some real substance behind the comparison that's worth examining. A lot of economists and policy experts have been saying similar things for years, right? But it takes someone like Elon with his platform to really bring it into the public conversation.
That's a really good point. So for our listeners who might not be totally clear on what a Ponzi scheme actually is, can you break that down? Like, how is that even remotely similar to something the government runs?
So a Ponzi scheme, at its most basic level, is where early investors get paid returns using the money from new investors coming in. It's not generating actual value or returns. It's just cycling money from new participants to pay the old ones. And the whole thing collapses when you can't find enough new investors to keep paying the earlier ones, right?
Oh, like that Bernie Madoff situation?
Exactly like that. And the comparison to Social Security comes from the fact that current workers' payroll taxes aren't going into some personal account that grows for them. Those taxes are immediately being used to pay current retirees. So the money I'm putting in today isn't actually being saved for me. It's going straight to someone who's already collecting benefits.
Wait, so that does sound kind of similar, doesn't it? But isn't insurance supposed to work differently?
Absolutely. In a true insurance model, your premiums are based on your risk profile, and they're invested to create a pool of money that can pay out claims. And importantly, there's normally some relationship between what you put in and what you can expect to get out. But Social Security doesn't really work that way at all.
So if I'm understanding this right, Elon's point is that it's structurally similar to a Ponzi scheme because it depends on having more people paying in than taking out. Like, if that ratio gets out of whack.
That's exactly it, Dickie. The system was designed in the 1930s when we had way more workers per retiree. But demographic trends have completely changed that ratio. We used to have like 16 workers for every beneficiary. And now it's heading toward just 2 workers per beneficiary. That's why the trust fund is projected to be insolvent in just a few years, right? The math just doesn't work anymore.
So, let's get into the details here. How does Social Security actually work? Like, what percentage of people's income goes into this thing?
Well, the way it functions is pretty straightforward. In theory, at least. So basically, everyone with a job pays in 6.5% of their income, and then their employer matches that with another 6.5%. That's a total of 13% of your salary going into the system. And if you're self-employed, you're actually paying the full 13% yourself, which is pretty brutal for small business owners, right?
Wow, that's a big chunk of money. And what do people get back for all that investment?
That's where it gets really interesting and honestly kind of problematic from an insurance perspective. You see, the benefits you receive in retirement are capped regardless of how much you've paid in. So like, if you're someone who makes an average income throughout your life, you might get around $1,500 to $2,500 a month in retirement benefits. But here's the thing. If you're someone like Elon Musk, who makes millions or billions, you're still only going to get roughly that same $2,500 a month maximum benefit.
Wait, seriously? So someone could pay like millions into the system over their lifetime and still get the same benefit as someone who paid way less? That doesn't sound like insurance at all.
Exactly. In a true insurance model, your benefits would be somewhat proportional to your premiums, right? Like with car insurance, your coverage limits are based on what you pay for. But Social Security doesn't work that way. It's actually more of a redistributive system wearing the costume of an insurance program.
So if I pay in $10,000 over my life, I get a tiny benefit, but if I pay in like $300,000, I might max out around $2,500 a month.
That's right. And if you paid in $10 million, still just that same $2,500 maximum. It's completely disconnected from your contribution amount after a certain point. In real insurance, that would never happen. Your premiums would reflect your risk and your potential payout.
So that's why some people call it a wealth redistribution program instead of actual insurance?
Absolutely. And look, wealth redistribution might be something some people support, but we should at least be honest about what the system is and isn't. It's mandatory participation with a cap on returns and redistribution built right into the structure. No private insurance company could legally operate this way. They'd be shut down immediately for making promises they mathematically can't keep.
That's a really good point. So it's not really insurance in the traditional sense at all?
Not even close. Traditional insurance calculates premiums based on actuarial risk. Your payments reflect your likelihood of needing a payout, but Social Security just takes a flat percentage, regardless of your health, life expectancy, or any other factor that would normally determine insurance rates. It's just fundamentally different from how actual insurance operates in every other context.
So, given all that, what's the actual financial health of Social Security looking like? I've heard some pretty concerning things about its future.
Oh man, it's not good. According to the Social Security trustees themselves, the trust fund for retirement benefits is projected to be completely insolvent by 2033. That's less than a decade away at this point. And the disability fund, it's been running deficits for years already. I mean, the math just doesn't work long term.
Wow, 2033, that's really soon. What happens when the trust fund runs out?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? When the trust fund is depleted, Social Security won't completely collapse, but benefits would need to be cut by about 20 to 25% across the board. And remember, a lot of seniors depend on Social Security for like 90% of their income. A cut that size would be absolutely devastating for millions of people.
Oh man, that's terrible. But couldn't the government just like borrow more money to cover the shortfall?
I mean, technically yes, but that's part of the problem. You know, Barack Obama actually admitted on national TV once that if Congress didn't raise the debt ceiling, Social Security checks might not even go out. Think about that for a second. If this is supposed to be insurance, it's insurance that might not pay when you need it most.
That's pretty scary to think about. So what you're saying is the whole system is basically running on borrowed time.
Exactly. And borrowed money? The demographic reality is that we used to have like 16 workers for every beneficiary. Now it's down to about 2.8 workers per beneficiary. And that ratio keeps shrinking. So each working person is carrying a bigger and bigger load. This system was designed for a population pyramid that no longer exists. People are living longer, having fewer children. The entire mathematical foundation is crumbling.
So without major reforms, the system just can't survive in its current form?
No way. And the longer we wait to make those reforms, the more painful they'll be. We're looking at some combination of raising the retirement age even further, increasing taxes, or cutting benefits. None of those options are politically popular, which is why politicians keep kicking the can down the road. But the math doesn't care about politics, right? The day of reckoning is coming, whether we address it or not.
Is there any way to fix it without completely overhauling the system?
Honestly, I don't think so. The fundamental structure is flawed. When you have a system where new participants pay for current beneficiaries, you're always dependent on population growth and wage growth. And neither of those factors are working in our favor right now. It's like ... It's like trying to patch a boat that has structural damage. You can keep bailing water, but eventually you need to rebuild the boat.
That's a pretty bleak outlook for something that millions of Americans are counting on for their retirement.
Yeah, and that's why we need to have these difficult conversations now, you know? Because if we wait until the system actually breaks, it'll be too late for people to properly prepare. The longer we pretend everything's fine, the worse the eventual reckoning will be.
So, Adrian, you know, I don't usually talk about this much on the show, but I actually have some personal experience with the Social Security system that might be relevant here.
Oh yeah. I mean, I know a bit about your story, but I think our listeners would really benefit from hearing about it, since we're talking about the system and all.
Well, back in 2013, I was in this really bad head-on car accident, and it was pretty severe. I mean, I didn't immediately apply for SSDI or anything. I actually tried to keep working for as long as I possibly could.
That's right, and if I remember correctly, you even started some businesses during that time, right?
Yeah, exactly. I invested in real estate, opened a vaporizer shop. I really tried to stay off the system, But eventually, well, these injuries, they just caught up with me. There's only so much you can do when you've got, like, titanium holding your body together.
I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been. So when did you finally decide to apply for SSDI?
It was 2016 when I finally got approved. And here's the thing that I think is important. I had paid into that system for years through my payroll taxes. It wasn't like I was taking a handout. This was a benefit that I had earned. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. That's the thing people sometimes forget about Social Security disability insurance. You literally can't qualify unless you've paid into the system. It's an earned benefit.
Right, and even while I was receiving SSDI, I still tried to work as much as I possibly could. I remember falling off a ladder trying to install a security camera. Actually cut off my finger in the process. That's how committed I was to maintaining some independence.
Wow, that's intense. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you were also determined to still do things for your family, right? Even with the limitations?
Absolutely. I hustled to take my kids to Universal Studios to give them memories they wouldn't forget. And look, I paid for that out of my own pocket, not Uncle Sam's. There's this misconception that people on disability are just, sitting around collecting checks. The reality is so different.
So having been on both sides of this, as someone who's criticized the system and also benefited from it, how do you feel about Social Security now?
It's complicated, man. I'm grateful the safety net was there when I needed it. That's undeniable. But I still see all the structural problems we've been talking about. The system helped me, but that doesn't mean it isn't fundamentally flawed,
That's a really important perspective, and I think it shows that you can both value the protection while still being honest about the problems. Like, these aren't mutually exclusive positions.
Exactly. The safety net serves a purpose. When your life gets derailed by something completely unexpected like mine did, it's crucial. But acknowledging that doesn't mean we should ignore the math showing the system is unsustainable. We need to fix it so it's actually there for people in the future who need it. So speaking of system problems, have you seen that absolutely wild report that just came out from DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency?
Oh my God, yes. That report was just shocking, honestly. They found, literally millions of Social Security beneficiaries who are supposedly over 120 years old. I mean, can you believe that?
Wait, over 120 years old? That's literally impossible, right? The oldest person ever documented was 122 or something?
Exactly. That's exactly right. The oldest verified person ever was Jean Calment, who lived to 122. And that was, a world record. So we're talking about millions of people on the Social Security rolls who are supposedly older than the oldest person who ever lived. I mean, it's just absurd, right?
So what you're saying is these are actually dead people who are still getting checks?
Yes, that's exactly what's happening. These are people who died years ago, decades ago in some cases. And somehow their deaths were never recorded in the Social Security Administration.
Well, the report
systems.
didn't give an exact
and so
figure,
the
but we're
payments
talking about,
potentially
they just keep
billions
going
of
out,
dollars
month
every
after
year,
month,
going
year after
to
year.
deceased people, or more likely, going to relatives or caretakers who just never reported the death and kept cashing the checks. Or in some cases, the money's just sitting in accounts that nobody's touching.
And this is the kind of thing that really makes me question how the whole system is managed, Like if they can't even figure out that someone who'd be 120 years old is probably dead.
Right. It's a perfect example of the inefficiency we've been talking about. And the really important thing here is that DOGE found that if they just cleaned up these records and stopped sending checks to people who are clearly deceased, it would actually extend the life of the Social Security Trust Fund by several years.
So wait, we could literally help save Social Security just by making sure we're not sending money to dead people? That seems like, I don't know, step one of running a program.
Exactly. It's the most basic form of verification. But the system is so bloated and bureaucratic that these kinds of obvious problems just persist for decades. And this is money that should be going to real, living people who actually need the benefits.
So what's the plan? Are they actually going to fix this?
Well, DOGE has recommended an immediate audit and cleanup of the beneficiary rolls. The question is whether the Social Security Administration will actually implement it. There's so much bureaucratic inertia in these big systems that even obvious fixes can take years to implement.
So we've been dancing around this term Ponzi scheme that Elon Musk used. Can you break down what a Ponzi scheme actually is? Just so we're all on the same page here.
Yeah, absolutely. So a Ponzi scheme is basically it's a fraudulent investment operation where the person running it pays returns to existing investors using money from new investors rather than from actual profit earned. The whole thing relies on a constant flow of new money coming in to pay the earlier investors. And when that new money stops flowing in, the whole thing collapses.
Okay, and so how does that compare to how Social Security actually works? Because I'm seeing some similarities there.
Well, that's the thing that makes this comparison so uncomfortable for a lot of people. In Social Security, current workers are funding current retirees through their payroll taxes. Your Social Security taxes aren't going into some personal account with your name on it. They're going directly to pay today's beneficiaries. So there is this structural similarity where new participants, today's workers, are funding the returns for earlier participants, today's retirees.
That does sound pretty similar to what you just described.
It does, right? And that's why the comparison sticks. But there are some important differences too. For one thing, Social Security isn't fraudulent. Everyone knows exactly how it works. It's not pretending to be something it's not, and it's mandatory, which means it doesn't rely on convincing new investors to join voluntarily.
But doesn't it still have the same fundamental math problem? Like, if you need more and more new people paying in to support the people taking money out?
That's exactly the issue. The system was designed with certain demographic assumptions: growing population, more workers than retirees. But now we have an aging population, lower birth rates, and the ratio of workers to beneficiaries is shrinking. In 1950, you had about 16 workers for every Social Security beneficiary. Today, it's closer to 3 to 1, and it's projected to drop to 2 to 1 by 2035.
So is that sustainable?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the trillion-dollar question. The system can be adjusted. Raise taxes, cut benefits, increase the retirement age. But these are all politically difficult choices. So while it's not exactly a Ponzi scheme, it does share that fundamental vulnerability, where if the flow of new money slows down too much relative to the obligations, you've got a serious problem.
So it sounds like you're saying it's not technically a Ponzi scheme, but it's Ponzi adjacent?
Yeah, that's not a bad way to put it. It's Ponzi adjacent. It has structural similarities but also important differences. The biggest similarity is that both rely on growth, either new participants or economic growth, to sustain payments. The question is whether we should design our social safety nets with that kind of built-in vulnerability. You know?
So, one thing that keeps bugging me about this whole system, it seems like there's a huge disconnect between what you pay in and what you get back. Is that really how insurance is supposed to work?
No, and that's a really good point. In a true insurance model, there's generally a relationship between what you pay in and what you can expect to get out. But Social Security has this weird structure where, someone making millions is paying way, way more into the system, but they're capped at basically the same maximum benefit as someone who made a much more modest salary.
That doesn't sound like insurance at all.
It's not. It's really not. What we have is more like a hybrid system that has some insurance-like features, but with redistribution baked right into the design. You've got people who pay in $300,000 over their lifetime, getting about $2,500 a month in benefits. But then someone who pays in $10 million over their career, they still get that same $2,500 a month. That's not insurance, that's redistribution wearing an insurance costume.
But isn't that, isn't that kind of the point, like to help people who couldn't save enough on their own?
Yes and no. The system was marketed to Americans as an insurance program, not as a wealth redistribution program. And that matters because people have different feelings about insurance versus welfare. Most people are totally fine with insurance. You pay in, you get protection. But redistribution is more politically contentious. Right? So there's this lack of transparency about what Social Security really is.
So it's like we're calling it one thing, but it's actually another?
Exactly. And look, there's nothing inherently wrong with having social programs that help people. That's what societies do. We should be honest about what these programs actually are. If we're going to have a discussion about reform, we need to acknowledge that Social Security isn't primarily an insurance program. It's a mandatory intergenerational wealth transfer program.
That's a mouthful.
It is. But it's accurate. And the thing is, if we were honest about that from the beginning, we might have designed it differently. We might have created something more sustainable, Something that wouldn't be facing this existential funding crisis that we're looking at now.
So, if this system is heading for a cliff, what are the options? Like, what can actually be done to fix Social Security before it, crashes and burns?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There are basically a few broad approaches. The first is just to patch the existing system, raise the retirement age even more, increase the payroll tax cap, maybe even increase the tax rate itself. But these are all just, they're Band-Aids, They don't address the fundamental structural problems.
What about the Libertarian approach? I remember reading something you wrote years ago about wanting to opt out completely.
Yeah, I did say that. From a libertarian perspective, the ideal reform would be to let people opt out entirely. Like, keep what I've paid in already. I'm not asking for that back. Just don't make me keep paying into a system that might not even be there when I need it, right? Let people take personal responsibility for their retirement planning.
But is that politically possible? Couldn't that accelerate the collapse if a bunch of people just stopped paying in?
You're absolutely right. It's basically impossible in the current climate. The system depends on new workers paying for current retirees. If you let people opt out, the whole house of cards falls apart even faster. And that's precisely why it resembles a Ponzi scheme, It needs constant new investment to stay afloat.
So what's the middle ground?
The middle ground might be something like a partial privatization. Allow people to direct some portion of their Social Security taxes into private accounts that they actually own and control. Chile did something like this back in the 80s, and Singapore has their Central Provident Fund, which is sort of similar.
Has that worked in those countries?
It's had mixed results. The Chilean system has delivered better returns than their old system, but there are still gaps in coverage. The thing is, any reform is going to involve trade-offs, right? There's no magic solution that fixes everything without any downsides.
What about just printing more money to cover the shortfall?
Oh God, that's the worst option. That just creates inflation, which hurts retirees on fixed incomes the most. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline, The challenge is that any meaningful reform requires political courage. And that's in short supply when it comes to touching what people call the third rail of American politics.
The third rail, is that like a subway reference?
Yeah, exactly. It's the electrified rail in subway systems. Touch it and you die. That's how politicians view Social Security reform. They're terrified of it because they think voters will punish anyone who tries to change the system, even if those changes are necessary for its survival.
So, let's talk about how this affects different generations. Isn't it true that my parents' generation is getting a much better deal than millennials or Gen Z will?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The generational imbalance it's staggering, if I'm being honest. Your parents, and even more so your grandparents' generation, they hit what you might call the Social Security jackpot. They paid in relatively little throughout their careers, and they're collecting benefits for decades as lifespans increased.
And the retirement age keeps getting pushed back, right? So younger people have to work longer before they can claim anything?
Right, exactly. So when Social Security first started, the retirement age was 65. And And the average life expectancy was actually lower than that. Now we've got the retirement age gradually increasing to 67. And for millennials and Gen Z, I wouldn't be surprised if it eventually gets pushed to 70 or beyond. So younger generations are literally paying more for longer and waiting longer to collect anything.
That seems, I don't know, kind of unfair.
It's completely unfair. And here's another thing that's really insidious. The cost of living adjustments? They're not keeping pace with real inflation, especially in areas like housing and healthcare that hit seniors hardest. So even when benefits do increase, they're not increasing enough to maintain purchasing power.
I've heard people say that millennials should just assume Social Security won't be there for them at all. Is that too extreme?
I wouldn't say it won't exist at all, but it will almost certainly be a much worse deal. If you're under 40 today, you should expect to pay higher payroll taxes during your working years and receive lower benefits when you retire. That's just the mathematical reality of the system as it stands. The younger you are, the more you're subsidizing current retirees, and the less you can expect in return.
So we're basically asking young people to fund their grandparents' retirement while knowing they'll never get the same deal?
Exactly. And that's why I think we need to be honest about this intergenerational transfer. We're essentially imposing a hidden tax on younger workers to support a system that's becoming less and less viable. And when you combine this with other generational challenges like student loan debt, housing unaffordability, it's no wonder younger people feel the deck is stacked against them.
So, we've covered a lot of ground here. What's your, final take on this whole Social Security situation? Is it salvageable, or are we just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic?
Well, I think we need to acknowledge that Social Security has been absolutely vital for millions of Americans, right? It's kept countless seniors and disabled people from falling into poverty, and that's something we can't just dismiss. But, and this is a big but, we also can't keep pretending that the system isn't fundamentally flawed in its structure.
That seems fair. I mean, having been on SSDI myself, I definitely see the value, but the math doesn't lie, right?
Exactly. The math just doesn't work long term. And what drives me crazy is that we can't seem to have an honest conversation about it without people immediately jumping to extremes. Like, either you want to dismantle the entire safety net, or you're denying there's any problem at all. And neither position is helpful.
So what would real reform look like to you?
I think we need to start by being brutally honest about the numbers. We need to acknowledge that current workers are subsidizing current retirees in a way that's unsustainable. And then we need to consider creative solutions. Maybe it's partial privatization, maybe it's means testing, maybe it's gradually transitioning to a different model entirely.
All while making sure people who genuinely need help don't fall through the cracks.
Absolutely. That's the balancing act, right? We need a system that's both compassionate and mathematically viable. And that means having tough conversations about what we can actually afford and what promises we can realistically keep to future generations.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on. This has been Disruptarian Radio. I'm Dickie Thompson.
And I'm Adrian Mulligan. Thanks for joining us today on this deep dive into Social Security. Remember, questioning the status quo isn't about being heartless. It's about being honest.
We'll catch you next time, where we'll tackle another hot topic that deserves some disruptarian thinking. Until then, stay curious and keep questioning.